Hi, I'm Scott Davies, Police Sergeant at Bourneville Police Station for West Midlands Police. So I've got 22 years service, joined back in 2003. Motivation for joining the job was I wasn't enjoying my job at Tesco. I was a manager at Tesco, fancied a change, looked on the internet and West Midlands Police come up. So I thought that sounded interesting, applied for it, and obviously 12 months later found myself in a position where I was now a police officer. Over that course of time, I've worked various roles from response, traffic, intelligence, worked at the airport. Most recently, I've been promoted to sergeant, now back on response at Bourneville, leading a team of officers and trying to keep them motivated. And obviously, a lot of them are young and have been affected by various pain conditions within the organisation. Certainly, younger officers are coming in and finding it very difficult to survive, should we say, on the money that they're getting. But personally, I've noticed that officers are struggling to get to the end of the month. They're having to dip into overdrafts or use credit cards to sort of see out from one payday to another. Officers are younger in services find it difficult to buy their own properties and obviously use that money that they are getting to put into their futures with securing properties or getting themselves a decent vehicle to get to work. They are literally living hand to mouth most times, or majority of the times, month to month. Obviously, external forces do play a big impact on them carrying out that role. A lot of them are very sort of despondent to the level of work they have to do, particularly on response. I'm not saying it's the same across the board. There are other departments that are probably not quite as in a demanding role. That's not saying they're not busy. Of course, everyone across the organisation is very busy. But officers on response, and certainly what I've noticed in the last 10 years, you lose a lot of experience on response because people are not willing to stay in that work environment, to be pushed from pillar to post all the time for the amount of pay they're getting. They're realising very quickly the organisation has various opportunities, and at their earliest opportunity they will, for want of a better term, jump ship into another role that they feel is more rewarding for the level of work they have to put in and the pay that they are getting from month to month. Yeah, I think the time I probably felt most like that was when I worked at Digbeth on what was called a community action and priorities team. We used to cover the nighttime economy on Broad Street in Birmingham. Certainly officers were spread wide and thinly across Broad Street, and certainly been some hair-raising moments where I've been in disorders where it's myself and another officer literally fighting with 12 to 15 people, and the only thing we can do is sort of bear hug somebody on the ground until backup arrived, and whilst on the floor obviously getting kicked and punched, and quite sort of a dodgy situation to be in. Yeah. You're a police officer, and we run towards danger and put ourselves in those positions and for the greater good of the public. But certainly many times whilst on Broad Street I did think, is this really worth the money that I'm sort of earning? I'm putting myself at risk and obviously other colleagues at risk in situations where we just didn't have enough officers. And in some senses, I'm seeing that on response now. I'm a response sergeant. They are literally pushed from pillar to post, and where demand becomes higher, we're getting encouraged to split double crewed units up and make them single crewed, so it looks like we've got more officers on the ground, and that obviously brings its own dilemmas and frustrations in terms of putting people single crew automatically makes them probably less likely to run towards danger and deal with those situations because they haven't got the backup readily available. I don't think the public fully understands as to what resources we have available, and that's sort of prevalent really with me working quite closely with response in terms of the amount of logs we get on a daily basis. Yesterday I was in the command hub where I'm monitoring the logs, and during my course of tour of duty there was at least 55 emergency logs, so people phone 999 and we deem that an immediate response, and that's on top of all the other logs that are coming in. Any given time we could have 50 to 100 outstanding logs where people require our response, not necessarily immediately, but I think they pick up the phone and they expect a police officer to turn up for whatever it is they're calling us for, and we sometimes just can't get there on that day that they're calling us, and maybe not even the next day. We're booking appointments 2 or 3 days in advance for people, which guarantees they get to see a police officer, but that level of response is just not acceptable. And that's not because the officers are not pulling their weight or doing the work. They literally are being pushed to their limits. And obviously with that you get burnout, and with burnout you get sickness and people not wanting to come to work. And again, I think if the pay and conditions were better, people would put up with a lot more if they felt that they were being valued within the role that they're doing. From my perspective of managing my team, we're carrying something like 260 live investigations. That's probably about 10 per officer, and that's on top of the stuff that they're getting sent out to. So along with those investigations where they're trying to look at harassment or someone who's been assaulted or a shop theft, they're then getting sent to other jobs and piling up on top of that workload. It's just this, it's a never-ending conveyor belt of them picking up jobs. About 18 months ago, response officers started picking up their own workload again. When I first joined, we did that as response officers, but back then the demand was certainly far lower than it is now. If we had 1,500 logs back in mid-2000s, that was an average day. We're hitting like 6,000 a day now. So the demand is through the roof. We've probably got less officers to deal with that. Once an officer makes an arrest, basically that's their day over. They're going into custody. They're sometimes having to wait 3 or 4 hours to just get through the holding cell. Then it's probably about an hour booking in because of the amount of questions they're now being asked. Got a good friend actually who I worked with him on response in Solihull. He was looking at leaving, and I said to him, why don't you just try and specialise? So I helped him get onto traffic. He did 2 or 3 months on traffic, and he just thought, no, it's still not working. It's still not for me. I've got other opportunities outside the organisation. And he decided that 4 years in, it was his time to leave before he sort of got into that trap of the increase in money in terms of once you get to 7 years, obviously you're top rate PC. So he was thinking, I don't want to get to a level where I'm comfortable-ish with the money that's on hand. So he's took up an alternative form of employment outside the organisation where he's already saying to me he doesn't miss it, and he's so glad he made the move. And for those that want to leave, the biggest thing is making that leap. It is a big step to leave the organisation, regardless of your length of service. It does offer some job security, albeit I think that's slightly reducing now with, I've got no shame in saying it. I've been on medication in the past. It was a situational depression, if you like, because of something that my partner was going through, but it was from the impacts of the job. So, I myself have been on medication. I know many people who have had to turn to that sort of route and get through bad periods by utilising medication and that support. I think the organisation is getting slightly better in supporting people, but I don't think it's fully there in terms of that health and well-being. The mental health is massively impacted by what people see, the workload they've got. That varies obviously from department to department. Response is one of the areas where people are massively impacted. I think public protection unit carry a lot of work and see things that nobody will see in their lifetime. They're seeing on a daily basis. So the mechanisms I think are there, but I don't think they're quite fully up and running to a level that's needed within the organisation to make sure officers are fully supported and make sure that they're not going off sick or even worse, thinking about taking their own life and looking at those sort of more severe alternatives, feeling that they can't go on. Personally, again, it's impacted me. I've been in roles where I've not been happy, and at home it affects that home life. You're snappy, you can't enjoy yourself. You're always on edge. You're very anxious, and it's hard to sort of snap out of because work is, I think it's something about 70% of your work, your life is working. So in terms of being happy, it's massive. You've got to find yourself a role that not only suits you, but not only suits you at home, but not only suits your work, but suits you at home. And getting that balance is very difficult in this organisation. It's something that I've certainly had struggles with, and I know other people have. And that, like I say, I don't know if that support mechanism's there, or if it is, it's more of a tick box exercise rather than a mechanism that actually fully supports somebody. For me, it's a bit of a sliding scale. I would say I'm in a position at the moment where if an opportunity came up outside the organisation, it was the right opportunity, I don't think I'd turn it down. It would be a big leap for me because, as I say, I'm into single figures now in terms of my pensions in sight. If I left now, that would get deferred, or some of it will be deferred till I'm 60, and then some of it will be deferred till state pension age. So I'm automatically sort of adding 10 to 15 years on my working life if I went elsewhere. However, that being said, if my mental health got to a point where I could no longer cope with it and I had to do something else, then that would take precedence over any future money comforts. But it would, be a big leap for me to do. It would be a big risk. But if it got to the point where it was money or my health, then I'd always choose my health. But as cost of living goes up and pension increases and various subs like Fed subs and things like that increase over the years, we're slowly having to dip into that money. I don't personally have a side hustle, if you like, but I know people who do, whether that be a DJ or they'll do gardening for somebody, or things like that. So I know people who do have separate jobs or side hustles where they'll declare it to the organisation, but they need to do it just to make that bit of extra money and top up the pay they're already getting, just to make ends meet at the end of the month. Absolutely. I think as cost of living goes up, people are going to have to look at alternatives. Obviously, within this organisation, there's certain roles we can't do, or ones we declare and they get refused. If people feel they can make more money from that alternative job, then I can see them choosing that over the police. And what you get there is another hit on retention of officers. So unless those paying conditions within the police increase, I think retention is going to take a massive hit over the next few years. And if people do have an alternative employment to fall back onto, I think they're always going to choose that over this because obviously the increase in demand within the organisation and the workload that's put on them, it will take them to breaking point. You see more and more now older officers or more experienced officers taking that leap and going to do something else because they have a trade to fall back on. I know sort of 15 years ago, if anybody was mentioning leaving, that it'd be seen as sort of career suicide, whereas nowadays somebody saying they're going to leave, it's seen as a right step, a brave move, but the right step for them to do. In fact, I had an input today that for the first time ever, voluntary resignation has overtook retirement, which I think is a massive indication of the change in people willing to stay in the role. And I think a lot of that will be down to those pay and conditions dwindling over the years. I think there needs to be certainly an increase in the pay across the board for all officers in any case, because over the last few years it's massively dropped. And I just think that the organisation as a whole just needs to look at the demand that's put on officers from all departments. We need to start pushing back to various organisations that lean on the police such as social services, such as the NHS, whereby actually it's not our job to deal with some of the things that come our way, and we just need to turn around to people and say, no, enough's enough. That's not our role. That's something you need to pick up. We'll support you where we can, but we actually have got our own demand to deal with without everybody else piling on top of us. So my lad's 11. He often hears me moaning about my job. I'm very mindful of that can have an impact on him. If he was to turn around to me and say he wanted to join the police, I would probably discourage it. There are people out there that's all they've ever wanted to do. I would advise them probably to lower their expectations a little bit, set that bar a little bit lower than what they think they can do. If they think they can change the world, it's probably not going to happen. That's not saying they can't make a difference, but I think people come into the organisation very enthusiastic, very excited, and I think over the course of the years that sort of drops off. Cynicism kicks in, probably a bit of resentment for the organisation, but they get to a position where they're a little bit trapped. I feel like I'm a little bit trapped in terms of I'm so far committed into the role now. Like I said earlier, if I was to leave, I would probably losing a lot of money from my pension. But if health dictated that I needed to do that, then I would do so. I would just say to them, by all means, if it's something you've wanted to do for a long time, dip your toe in, suck it and see, but be prepared to change your expectations of what a difference you can make to the public. And I would give it a good review after 3 or 4 years just to see if it was still something you wanted to do and carry on with, and ensure that your health and well-being is sort of at the forefront of that decision. Yeah, I think so. I think certainly since they've brought in, although it's going now, but they brought in the degree. So you had to join if you either had to have a degree if you joined, or you do a degree alongside your work-based training. That is slowly going. We are going back to normal entry routes, but I think people have come into the organisation to get that degree, and after 3 or 4 years they've got it and then decided, actually I've done it, I've ticked a box, it's on my CV, it's going to look good for any other job that I go for, and they're getting out whilst they're still young and healthy to do so, and they're not really institutionalized enough to stick with it and have to stay with it because the increments of the money have gone up, and meant that they've had to stay in the role and they can't take that pay cut going into a different role outside the job.